So there's been an assassination attempt, an attempt on the life of one Alexander Dugin, which has resulted in the death of his daughter, not the death of himself. He narrowly escaped a car bomb. And while I would like to extend my my deep sympathies to Mr. Dugin and his family for the loss of his daughter, there is a lot of nonsense being spouted by Western pundits and the media surrounding this assassination attempt. People are calling Dugin Putin's brain, which I have to say, for everything I've learned about Russia and the Putin administration, Putin regime, whatever you want to call it, the idea that Alexander Dugin could somehow be the mastermind and the Rasputin behind Mr. Putin is the most fantastical, bizarre, and detached from reality idea that I've ever heard about Russia. All of these things, about oh, Putin assassinates every one of his political enemies. He's really worried about this guy Navalny, who nobody in Russia supports. All of these ideas and things like it. There's a lot of ideas floating around Western media about Russia that are wrong, in my experience, from everything I've been able to find, in actually looking into things myself. The Dugin stuff is the most absurd, the most inaccurate. I first heard about Alexander Dugin from Glenn Beck, a prominent American radio host. And he was the first person in America who, I think he was the biggest personality to really trumpet this narrative that Dugin is Putin's mastermind. If you want to understand Putin and Russia, you have to read Alexander Dugin's book. Spoiler alert, I did not read through Alexander Dugin's book, but I did take a look at his website, which is katehone.com. I'll link to it in the description if you guys want to go read it. For a couple of months, I guess I would glance there every couple of days and read the new articles they were putting out. And by reading the analysis of Dugin and his ideological allies and other people, their take on the news and stuff, I got an idea for what it is they think and how they think. And I came to the conclusion that while you could argue that Dugin's ideology would lead him to support someone like Vladimir Putin, it is difficult for me to look at the actions of the Russian government and say that the ideology of Alexander Dugin and his followers are the driving force behind the Russian government's actions. To put it plainly, Alexander Dugin is a mystic. He's an idealist. He's very much fond of these spiritual narratives about people being tied to the land. And likes to use flowery language about how there's a destined conflict between we the people of the land, meaning the Russians, because they're so far from the coast, and the Atlanticists, all these people who their lives revolve around the Atlantic Ocean. We here in Russia, our lives revolve around the land, and that makes us fundamentally different from the Americans and the Europeans, and we're always going to be different, and we can't be like them, and they're not like us, and so the people of the hinterlands have to band together and for this clash of civilizations against the Atlanticists. That's the 10,000-foot view of how Alexander Dugin looks at the modern world. The Russian government, on the other hand, led by Vladimir Putin, but of course made up of many other people who are not Vladimir Putin, seems to me to be overwhelmingly realist in its outlook. If you want to compare realists versus idealists in politics, I guess a better an American equivalent would be comparing neoconservatives to paleoconservatives. Neoconservatives in America are very idealistic in that they have a very spiritual in my opinion, view of politics, political structures, who we should ally or oppose on the international stage. Neocons, in their purest ideological form, even though this isn't always true in practice, they believe that democracies are inherently righteous, and that all of these non-democracies, these autocracies, whether they be monarchies or military dictatorships or single-party states, that they are inherently evil, they are violent and will lead to wars, and so therefore we must, declare preemptive war on them and turn the entire world into democracies so that everyone can be friends. Neocons don't really pick their friends based on a case-by-case basis. They don't compare, relative interests and trying to, balance the world order. They just look at it, okay, well, there are good countries and there are bad countries. And bad countries, we can justify doing anything to. We can take them out, we can bomb them, we can level their cities, doesn't matter because they're bad countries. And good countries, oh, well, we just have to be friends with them. Whereas a paleoconservative tends to support a realistic foreign policy where they look at each country on a case-by-case basis and they say, okay, well, do we have, matters that we can work together on? Do we have common interests? And if so, maybe we find your domestic politics a bit unsavory, but, we can get along in the international sphere and not meddle in each other's business. That's more of an example of a realistic foreign policy or a realist foreign policy. And you see that it's not, the difference is not just in how you treat other countries, international parties, and whatnot. It's also in how you think about them. It is a completely different mindset. And so that's what I see when I look at the Russian government. I don't want to claim to be some, Kremlin whisperer. There are plenty of charlatans in the West who claim to be experts in Kremlinology, but I feel pretty confident in calling Putin and almost everybody around him realists, particularly Lavrov. I think that the Putin folks, they are not coming to the table with, ideological or spiritualistic biases against certain countries. I have, looking at the history of their administration going back to 2000 or so, it seems to me that they are willing to work with whoever they share a common interest with and whoever can help them further their own interests. And that, to me, would put them in direct ideological opposition to someone like Alexander Dugin. Now, with that said, that doesn't mean that in practice they do things always the opposite of what he would approve of. The way things have worked out, I can see how Dugin would approve of most of the actions of the Russian government, when it comes to foreign policy, although I think if I had him on the phone, he would probably argue that they were way too soft on the West, and that the Putin and Lavrov, trying to deal with the West is a waste of time and only ended up getting Russia burned in the long run, and that they should have never tried because fundamentally the Atlanticist countries, will never be able to, cooperate with the people of the land. And moving forward, I think that Russia probably will, in practice, take a stance that is very much consistent with Dugin's way of thinking as far as that's concerned, but it will be as a result of experience and knowledge, not as a result of, ideological prejudices. I think that the Putin regime is going to deepen its ties with, the countries, surrounding it in inner Eurasia and distancing itself from Europe because the Europeans refuse to work with Russia because they want to embargo Russia. Whereas the Chinese are very happy to consume Russian energy. So I know I didn't give you a super detailed, deep dive into how Dugin thinks and how Putin thinks, but I wanted to just, tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, this media narrative that you keep hearing about, it's probably not the way that they're saying it. They're probably not telling you the whole truth. And hopefully, what I've done is I have piqued your curiosity enough to where you'll go look into this for yourself. Because you don't need me to tell you, what Dugin believes and what Putin believes. That's a play in a game of telephone. Go look and analyze these people yourself if you're that curious. If you really think that Dugin, is controlling Mr. Pooty-Poot, just look at the writings of this man and the people who agree with him, and compare it to the way that Russia actually acts. Not the way that the media says Russia acts, the way that they do actually act. Because if the media is coming to it from the perspective that everything that Putin does is driven by Dugin, well, then they are going to take every bit of news about Russia and put it through that filter. They're going to look at it as, okay, so look at what they did here. Let's analyze this from like a Duginist perspective, which I think the media actively does, even though they might not say that directly. But that is the way that they portray, Russia's actions. They say, oh, well, why is Putin invading Ukraine? Well, it's because he's an imperialist and he wants to unify Eurasia under the Russian flag and take over the world. He's going to rebuild the Russian Empire and crown himself, czar. If you're starting from the perspective of Putin is a Duginist, that is the way that you're going to spin that story. Whereas if you look at it and you say, you know what, I think they're acting, more from a realist point of view, you could just as easily argue, I think more easily argue, something that makes more sense, is that the Ruskies don't want U.S. troops on their border. And Ukraine was threatening to enter NATO. They refused to take that off the table. And that's why the Ruskies invaded Ukraine at the time that they did, and, not back in 1991 when Ukraine originally broke off, or in 2000 when Putin first came to power as president of Russia. He didn't invade Ukraine back then. He didn't even invade Ukraine, and take over, in 2014. All he did back then was give some aid to the folks in the Donbass so that they wouldn't be completely wiped out. But if he was a big, Russian imperialist, you would have thought, well, he would have taken that as his chance back then and said, you know what, now's there a good excuse? Let's just go and invade Ukraine since that's really what we want to do. But the fact that they didn't do that back then, makes me think, gee, maybe Russia didn't really want to invade Ukraine. Maybe they thought, you know what, this might burn some bridges, and we don't want to go down that road. But then when the West came and said, you know what, we're never going to be your friend. We want to put troops in Ukraine right up against your border. Hell, at the Munich Security Conference, Zelensky was talking about pursuing nuclear weapons. And nobody smacked him down for that. They just let him say that, all he wanted. And what do you know, within a few weeks, I think it was, the Ruskies invaded Ukraine. So the preponderance of evidence here seems to indicate that Putin is being driven by more realist concerns. And this Dugin guy is more of just, a fun media creation. So with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.